Hi, I'm Dave Mckeown. I am the host of the Church Explained podcast, and today we're so excited. We've got an amazing guest with us, a guy by the name of Makoto Fujimura, and he is an artist, a creator, and an author. And let me just say something about Mako today. And we're going to find out a little bit more about Mako as we go through the podcast. But Mako is the founder of the International Arts Movement and the Fujimura Institute, and the co-founder of the Consegu Academy. And you've written two books that I'm aware of, but there could be another one. I know you've written Culture, and the one on culture, is that correct?
Yeah, Culture Care and Art plus Faith, the Theology of Making, which is my new book. And then I also wrote a book called Silence and Beauty, which has to do with the book Silence by Shusaku Endo and Martin Scorsese's film Silence.
Oh, very good. I haven't come across that one. I've come across the other two. And obviously we want to talk today about art and faith, theology of making today in the podcast. So it's so good to have you with us. And thanks for joining us today. So it'd be great just to find out a little bit about yourself. We always like to ask our guests a little bit about their background, what they do, and their role in life as well. So I wonder if you could just share with our listeners today.
Sure. I was born in Boston, in the United States. My father is a fairly well-known scientist, and he was at MIT when I was born, doing his work with Noam Chomsky. So he brought the generative grammar theory into Japan, Tokyo University, and I spent my childhood years there, and came back to the United States in middle school. And I went to university in United States, and then went back to Japan for graduate studies in Nihonga, Japanese style paintings. And I became immersed in this ancient craft of painting, which harkens back to 15th century. And then my purpose for doing that, though, was to apply the principles into contemporary art. So I returned to U.S. In New York area, and I began to exhibit in the 90s as an artist here.
Fantastic. And family? Do you have family?
Yes, I am married, and I have 3 children from my previous marriage. So that is a journey that I speak about often. But I live here with my wife in Princeton, New Jersey now.
So, Marco, I was just thinking through this idea of how the work of artists and the work of public speakers, preachers, communicators, how there's possibly a connection there as they're creating something. Could you speak into that from your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. When you study the Bible, the first thing you notice is that God created. And so God is the artist. I make a claim in the book that God may be the only true artist, being able to create something out of not ex nihilo or nothing. And therefore, all of scriptures from the Old Testament to New Testament is filled with how we come to know this creator, the maker, and how God, the artist, invites his fallen creatures to participate in this project called new creation. And of course, in order to do that, you have to have the redemptive journey, presence of Jesus in our lives, and his atonement and sacrifice, and the resurrection. But it all points to this new creation that God is inviting us into. So therefore, preaching or any kind of our effort to worship is inherently a creative act in accordance to what this artist, great artist, is inviting us into. So whether it be worship, whether it be service of mercy, creating beauty in any form, not just what I do as an artist, but it could be a chef making an omelet, or someone gardening to grow things, grow tulip. Those are all creative activities that connects us to each other, and ultimately through the Spirit we can be connected to the Creator.
Yeah, I love that idea that we're connected to the Creator, and of course this idea that God is the ultimate artist above all, isn't He? With all He's created. Do you think then, for people listening, do you think, would you say that all people have the ability to create and should be thinking of doing that?
Yeah, we are created to be creative. Moment we conceived, I believe that God has instituted this enormous potential in us. Now, circumstances could prevent us from reaching that potential, and we hope we can do the best we can to give that potential the possibility of that reality to manifest in the fullest sense in everybody's life. And to me, the calling of a Christian church is for flourishing of all people and all creatures. Not just so that we can be restored in a sense to have a relationship with God, but God, again, as an artist, is looking at us as God's artwork, ultimate artwork, and that includes all the things that happen that we wrestle against and we struggle through, and yet God is sovereign and in control of that. As the master artist conductor, he is weaving something very beautiful in us, despite what the world looks like right now. So everybody is involved in that project.
And despite the chaos, we all have something that we can share and something we can bring. And I know one of the ideas you mentioned in your book is this sort of concept around the difference between making and using, and that really intrigued me, because I think often we do make things to use more than just making them for something bigger. I wonder if you could maybe speak into that as well. That would just be fantastic.
Sure. I call it plumbing theology, and a lot of preaching that I hear tends to be about, redemption of Christ, which is at the heart of the gospel. Surely it is one of the most important realities for us to understand, that Jesus have given us access to this reality of God Himself, and yet the redemptive act doesn't end at the cross, or doesn't end at the resurrection. At the resurrection is an inauguration of new creation. And therefore, we, fallen creatures, now redeemed by God, is now supposed to play a major role in ushering in this new creation in now and in the future. And so we tend to truncate, and what I mean by plumbing theology is, we are often given tools to use at church programs, and we are supposed to fix things. We're supposed to fix our marriages. We're supposed to fix society. We're supposed to fix sinfulness, and those are not bad things, but we tend to not hear why it is that we're doing the fixing. So we get all these tools at church, and we go home and use it to fix our plumbing, and it works, and we invite our neighbors to come and help them to learn this new tool. But very rarely you hear a sermon about why we are fixing the broken pipes, what is going through the pipes, and what is the result of us finding that flourishing of healing that is coming through the Spirit, the blood of Christ that cleanses us, and the wine of new creation that is flowing backwards through the pipes into our communities. And what would that do? Well, that would make us makers. That would make us be people who would be known for beauty and mercy. And yet, oftentimes the preaching stops at, okay, so you have been redeemed, you need your neighbor redeemed, so let's go out and share the gospel to your neighbors. And that's not wrong, but it is only a portion of the grand story of the good news, which is a remarkable, unbelievable, in a sense, calling that we have toward this abundance of God in midst of ground zero conditions all over us, the scarcity around us, the wasteland in front of us. Those are pointing actually at Jesus' words that call us beyond what we see. And that's why it takes faith to walk into places like Ukraine right now, devastation. And yet we are, as Christians, to seek God's abundance in that very heart of darkness. And these are things that we see inspiration in the world, like President Zelensky showing up in the midst of that and courageously showing leadership that points to just beyond this war, right? It points to a world in which human beings ought to act, heroically faced with evil, faced with darkness, and pointing at some grand narrative that move far beyond the end of this war into a community and society that we long to live in.
Yeah, I love that, and I think just picking up around those ideas that you've mentioned there is sometimes we stop the gospel too short. We say it's up to the point of redemption or forgiveness, but actually the gospel is much bigger than that, and I think. Yeah, absolutely, and it involves the new creation, and that's some of the big themes that comes through in your book, the difference between kainos and neos or neon. And again, those are great ideas, and I wonder if you could just maybe speak a little bit further into that for our listeners as well, because some great nuggets there, I think, that will help people move from the fact that the gospel is not just this small portion, but actually it's much bigger.
Yeah, it's not certainly a checklist of things to do and not to do. The word kainos comes from Paul's words, in Christ we are new creation. And that word new is kainos. And, in Greek, there are several words for newness. And this is a very distinctive word that Paul uses, very rare use. And usually what is new, like a new iPhone, is neos. So from which we get the word neon. It's flashy, it's new, everybody wants it, but next day it's old, and there's a new one, next in 6 months or whatever. And so that's neos. What is kainos? Kainos, well, I transliterate as newness. What Paul is saying is that this newness in Christ is so substantially and so radically new that we don't really understand this newness, that this is a new kind of newness, which is exemplified by Christ's resurrected body, which is a body. He's not a ghost, but he is fully present, and yet he's everywhere. And he has his nail marks with him. And so what is this newness? Well, we don't fully have language for this. So kainos is a language that Paul chose to use as a way to designate that this is not like a new iPhone or new car. This is a newness that is redefining what new is.
Hi everyone, I hope you're enjoying the podcast. We just want to take a moment and pause and let you know about something exciting we have on offer right here from Icon Open. We help leaders find solutions through our coaching and team training. And we've worked with all types of churches in different countries around the world, from large churches to small churches, and of course anything in between. And leaders come to us for a variety of reasons. For some, they simply want to get to the next level in their leadership. They want a coach to work with them for a period of time so they can get new momentum or fresh ideas or fresh insights for the next part of their journey. Other leaders will come to us, maybe they're working through some opportunities or challenges in their church, and just maybe to have someone to think with them and help them process through big ideas like staffing or teams or transitions really does seem to make a difference to them. So if you've never had a coach and you're a senior leader or a leader within a church, we want to encourage you to get in touch with us, because we think we can really help you find the solutions you need for the next part of your journey. Have a look at icon.church/coaching and you'll find all the details there of how to connect with us, and we look forward to hearing from you very, very soon. Yeah, very good. And I think, again, it just picks up on some of the other big ideas in the book, which was, you talk about the Consegu Principle, which is a great idea. And it got me thinking of this, Mako, around the idea of how can that principle really help people at this time, like whether it's church leaders or those they're looking after. Because I think it does pick up on this idea that we are all broken, but actually it's not just about making it new and ignoring what we were, but it's actually dealing with some of what we were before and bringing that into the new. And I wonder, maybe some of our listeners maybe haven't heard of that principle before. I wonder if you could share a little bit about it and how you think it applies to church leaders and the people, I suppose, in general at the minute.
Kintsugi is a Japanese word. Kin is gold, and tsugi means to mend. Tsugi also means tsugu means to pass something on to the next generation. It flows out of the high tea ceremony of 16th century Japan. And kintsugi has become kind of ubiquitous now in culture. There's in Star Wars, Kylo Ren's helmet is kintsugi, and it's kind of everywhere now. But it is a traditional art form by Japan lacquer masters, urushi masters, who would take broken ceramics. Sometimes very important teaware will break because of many earthquakes and tsunamis in Japan. And the families of tea masters will often hold on to the fragments for several generations and then give the fragments and the story of how that tea was used to serve certain dignitaries or shogun or whatever that may be. And Japan lacquer master will not fix it, but mend it to make new with gold in the fissures of the cracks. So the cracks are amplified and highlighted and beautified by gold, which makes the kintsugi bowl, the end product of kintsugi, to be more valuable than even the original bowl, as valuable as that may have been. So in Japanese tradition, this idea of imperfection, finding beauty through imperfection, is critical. It's a central understanding of how we understand that impermanence is actually, and even death itself can become beautiful. And it's kind of counter to Western notion of perfected beauty. And so this takes a while to adjust our thinking. And yet many people resonate with this today in a fragmented society with so many divisions, even obviously politically, but divisiveness within the church, countries at war. When things break, Western mind says, well, throw it away, we'll build a new one. But the Japanese will say, no, let's first look at the brokenness and behold it until we can see beauty in that. And let's process this, together, perhaps, to be able to understand what had happened. It has a generational impact. You can't just move on. I'm a survivor of 9/11. I lived 3 blocks away from the towers, and I was trapped underneath. But you cannot move away from ground zero in that sense, because the ground zero is part of you now. And so beholding the fractures, beholding what is broken becomes the first step into understanding how even those painful memories and even the trauma that you experience can be an entry point into something new that did not exist before. And if you're a Christian and if you understand the post-resurrection journey of Christ would, as a wounded human being, coming back in fullness, and yet he chose to have the nail marks with him, and it is through his wounds that we are healed. So therefore, our new creation, the kainos reality, comes through Christ's wounds. It is as if a light shines through them into our hearts so that we can be healed and our wounds can become not just fixed, but also mended to become new. So I think kintsugi is one of the most profound concepts indigenous to Japan. But as I talk about in my Silence and Beauty book, Japanese culture has hidden many realities of biblical story and gospel in her culture. This is because Christianity flowed into Japan very early on because of Silk Road history. And then through many years of persecution, Japan has persecuted Christian thoughts underneath. And I argue that has become Japanese culture at large. And in fact, what the Japanese are talking about when they talk about beauty, the sacrificial beauty is pointing at Christ.
Yeah, I mean, I think that picture of Jesus, the resurrected Jesus, with his still having those wounds, really does speak into that, because so often we think, I think by and large in the church, we can often think that when we become new, that all those bits are left behind and almost not important or not useful. And I think that's where the Consegu Principle and this picture of pulling the parts together makes something even more beautiful. I think to me it's much more stronger and maybe speaks into this kainos, this newness. It's not just like we're new, the old is gone, and that's it. But actually there's something powerful about we carry something from the past. And some of those things we carry from the past, maybe we're not proud of. And even leaders, as they're listening, maybe stuff in their life they're not proud of. But actually even those things, God can take and mend them into something even greater.
Exactly. And we have
powerful.
to balance, of course, not celebrating brokenness in doing that. And that requires a deeper, more complex theological, thinking, and actually applying this is something that an artist does very well. If you watch Shakespearean theater, it's happening in front of you because the tension has to be there between what we seek to be perfect and the reality of brokenness that we actually experience on this side of eternity, and how that brokenness and this fallenness of Macbeth, right, becomes so real in us, right, that we start to identify with this lunatic, basically, a power-possessed lunatic, and yet there's truth there, right? So we have to balance between, we're not celebrating Macbeth, and yet we can understand our own frailties and fallenness, and be able to apply that principle through Christ. And this is only possible through Christ, because Christ is the only archetype for this type of inversion, this type of upside down kingdom, where the poor become rich, where the wounded are the wounded become the healers. And it is so upside down that I think it requires, very careful and nuanced, communication. And yet I see it everywhere in nature. I see it in the principles that we value in economics, in leadership teaching. So I think there's internal kind of compass toward this reality as well.
Yeah, and I think well put there for pointing out the fact that we're not here to celebrate brokenness, but I think also we're not here to ignore it either. I think it's seeing the big picture, isn't it, really, and seeing the fact that Christ can take the bits of us that actually aren't so good and create something better out of them going into the future. And I think that's one of the things I really love about that idea within the book. One of the other big things you talk around is this idea of slow art, and I'd watched some of the videos and tutorials that you had online through some of your stuff, and listen just to some of the processes and the lengthy processes there is within creating some of the art that you would make, and it got me thinking. Is there something that we can learn from slow art in our hurried world today, do you think?
Yeah. So there's such a divide between, in the industrial world, post-industrial world, between nature and what we make, and today you can make an entire movie without touching anything, and yet that has given us a kind of alienation from each other, alienation even from yourself, that psychiatrists are noticing, that, in the pandemic shutdown, we are always on Zoom, and we might be productive getting something done, and yet something is happening to our psyche where we feel totally isolated, and experience depression and loneliness in ways that we haven't. And it just points to the need that human beings have to somatic knowledge or somatic reality, and then that if you flip that, we can see how the church can be one of the most attractive places, winsome places where people simply to gather just to be a community, right? And yeah, we've been forced to be, doing Zoom worship and so forth. And there's something wrong when we can't touch, and embrace each other. That communion is meant to be served in person, right? So there's something about human nature and actually fabric of reality that we can't violate and go for too long. And so slowness is not just in what I do in pulverizing pigments, minerals, and mixing it by hand. And, it takes about, 6 hours to prepare the glue, and then you reconstitute it so it's this constant growth of trying to get the right kind of mixture for right time. And it's closer to gardening than it is to, making something industrial efficient with industrial efficiency. So when you use your hands, there's so many variables that come into play. And because the slowness of, whether you're making a stew or when you're making anything, it all comes down to the ingredients, and it comes down to the quality of what you choose. So it takes years of, training, as it were, to just get to that point where you choose the right things for the right time, and it keeps changing, right? So there's no formula, there's no recipe that accurately captures the carrots that you've chosen at the farmer's market. So you kind of have to intuit that, and that's what slowness does. Is when we come to understand that our senses fully alive in God, can have a deeper knowledge of understanding about making that we may not have on Zoom sessions or on TV, that's when we realize that there is something missing in education, right? And something missing actually in our churches that doesn't cultivate a sanctified imagination through our senses. And so we have not done well in advanced cultures to really connect with the earth, first of all, and we connect with each other. And so attentiveness is gone because of that. And so slowness in anything, slow art, if we can live a slow life, let's say, we might recover some of what we have lost.
Well, Mako, it has been such a pleasure to have you with us today on the Church Explained podcast. I want to thank you for joining me. If people want to find out more details about you, where would they need to go?
Just look up my name. My website will come up, and all the linkage to Cultural Care Creative, International Arts Movement, they're all there. So.
Fantastic. So again, we'll put that in the show notes, and people will be able to find that. And that has been fantastic. So a big thank you for being with us. And that is a wrap for us today.